Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for coming to our third Truth and Restoration Town Hall as a part of our Project for National Healing. Our topic today is authoritarian cults, shared psychosis, and media indoctrination. Please keep yourselves muted until you are called upon to speak, and this session is being recorded. I am Dr. Bandy, president of the World Mental Health Coalition, which is sponsoring today's event. Co-chairing with me is Dr. Ruth Ben-Ghiat, who is a leading historian on authoritarianism at New York University and author of Strongmen, Mussolini to the Present. Our moderators today are Leonard and Mark. The World Mental Health Coalition is a professional organization that is primarily concerned with societal mental health and with developing a robust dialogue on mental health so as to promote societal well-being. Political authoritarianism is on the rise everywhere. Before these developments at societal scale, there is shared psychosis. Shared psychosis, or folie à plusieurs, madness among many, simply means symptom transmission from a position of influence when a mentally impaired leader takes power. Emotional bonds are the vectors, and emotional drive causes symptoms to spread faster than we can reason with people. Shared psychosis is also a phenomenon that happens in cults and street gangs. Treatment is usually separation from the primary source. As we have seen from the recent CPAC conference and from many in media and politics, true separation from the former president is not happening. We also have just learned that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff himself compared Donald Trump to Adolf Hitler and how Nazism spread over Germany. And that Vladimir Putin himself may have authorized a secret Russian plan to support a mentally unstable candidate in 2016 to destabilize and discredit our entire sociopolitical system. Just the other day, the Surgeon General issued an unprecedented advisory that misinformation takes away our freedom to make informed decisions. But even the American Psychiatric Association led a misinformation campaign designed to keep the nation ignorant of the critical mental health dangers. Yet we independent mental health experts knew from the start that Trump was unfit to hold almost any major position, let alone president. We immediately held a conference at Yale and published our first book, The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, in 2017, leading to many media appearances and meetings with Congress members. Then in 2019, with the extensive information in the Mueller report, a panel of distinguished mental health professionals was able to perform a fitness evaluation, which found that Trump failed every criterion. Then with the pandemic, immediately in March of 2020, we issued an emergency prescription for survival, further warning the nation that Trump was not mentally fit to handle the crisis rationally. And we gave specific prescriptive details of what needed to be done. Had our recommendations been followed, most of the Americans who died in the pandemic would be alive today. Mental health professionals know what to do in individual cases of shared psychotic or induced delusional disorder. Separation from the primary source. We can extrapolate that knowledge and understanding of underlying dynamics when mental pathology reaches societal scale. We need mental health professional voices in the public sphere. We need collaboration with other sectors and disciplines. This is why thousands of us got together and formed the World Mental Health Coalition to help safeguard our societal mental health and our democracy. We believe the time is critical. This is how we came to organize this town hall series as our project for national healing, bringing together leading experts, key players, and members of the public to help identify core problems and to provide potential solutions. So we hope to use this information from today and other times effectively to advise government officials as well as to continue informing society at large. I will now turn over to Dr. Ben-Ghiat, who will say a few introductory remarks on the nature of authoritarian cults before we introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Bandy. Thanks everybody for coming. It's nice to see you all. And I'm just going to say a few words about the why authoritarian political cults form and what sustains them. And the kind of leader, like strongmen, as I call them in my work, who foster these cults, tend to find favor at moments of uncertainty and transition, when many people think that traditional politics has failed them or the system is broken, between quotes. And sometimes they come from outside the political system, or they build themselves as outsiders. And this is part of this rogue personality is very, very appealing. And they create new movements and they seem to communicate with their followers in original ways. They are very, very good persuaders. They build on extremist and authoritarian tendencies that already were in the culture, but they channel them, and once they get authority, they legitimate them. And in Trump's case, with the presidential imprimatur, up to the point where, in many cases, violence becomes an act that, quote, makes sense to followers, and violence can be rewarded within the world of the cult. So Trump's a good example. And his contribution to a process of radicalization that was already being set up by the Tea Party, by Fox News, and we know this story, was to add a leader cult. And these cults are very efficient in weakening democracy because they give a focus around the person of the leader to the anger and the grievance. And the leader also becomes, because of his domination of the media, the primary source of disinformation, very efficient delivery vehicle for conspiracy theories, for lies, and to make people doubt their own eyes and ears and accept the alternate reality that always benefits him. And the other thing the leader cult provides is a solution, supposed solution. So they don't just stoke anger and grievance and create this, like, you know, this pond or this swamp, right? It says he's going to drain the swamp, but they create a swamp of toxic emotions. They purport to have a solution. So there we have the I can fix it. I'm going to make the nation great, sort of, you know, utopias that they kind of hold out for people. And so although they specialize in negative emotions, but they also give people hope, and people identify with this leader's you know, persona, with him as the man who gets away with things, who can be above the law and is a law unto himself. And that's important for the disinformation. So authoritarian cult leaders share with celebrities a certain je ne sais quoi, as charisma is often described as, a special aura that draws people to them. But authoritarian charisma and cult leader charisma is a little different than just that of celebrities, where, again, you want to look at the person, you want to be with the person. This authoritarian charisma is all about their ability to supposedly make people do their bidding and even act against their own self-interests in an attempt to please the leader. So the suppression of the autonomous self and self-regard and self-love is very important to get the follower to accept the leader's belief system and immerse him or her in a kind of a substitute culture with its own language and its own rituals. So I'll close there, but say that these are very powerful mechanisms and dynamics. And when I did the research for strongmen, I was amazed at how they repeated over and over in different cultures and different times. And so the power of this is why these leader cults can persist even when the leader is out of office. So when, you know, there are many people saying when Trump was defeated, well, his leader cult will deflate. And I thought, no, not that easy. It probably won't happen because people don't want to give up the hope. And then, of course, the leader, if he's still in the media, like Berlusconi was and Trump is, they're expert at stringing these people along to keep the illusion. So I see January 6th coming from this perspective. It was many things, but it was also a leader rescue operation. And it was an attempt to make reality fit into the delusional world system by forcibly stopping the transfer of power. So I will stop there, and Bandy, back to you, I believe.
Thank you, Ruth. Our first speaker will be Mr. David Weissman, a former MAGA Trump cult member who has been bravely speaking out. So, Mr. Weissman.
Hi. So a lot about my background, in case a lot of people don't know, is I grew up religious. A lot of my views began from a sort of a conservative type religious upbringing. And I really got involved in politics, a little bit after 9/11. I started paying attention to news and started watching Fox News. That's actually something that we watched growing up. So I immediately turned into that programming. Watching Sean Hannity, different media personalities like that. So, and thinking about it is they do tie religion to a lot of the, some of the political beliefs. So you think that they're telling the truth. So a lot of the feelings that a lot of Trumpers have has actually been going on before Trump over the years during Obama's presidency. And there was a lot of fear indoctrination that was building up, fear that Democrats were going to go take your rights away, taking your freedoms away, supporting, radical religion, like after 9/11, the fear of Islamophobia, that really struck the heart of many Americans because they don't really know what's it about. So people like Sean Hannity, people like Rush Limbaugh, who are very, very good at fear indoctrination, making people think that, we were in danger. The American way of life was in jeopardy. And during that time, when that was going on, especially getting close to the presidential elections, Trump, he saw the voices of conservatives, the concerns of what conservatives were speaking about, immigration, the caravans, taking our guns away, this and that. And I believe that's how I got a lot of people. And that's what hooked me in 2016 when I decided to become a Trump supporter myself. I was Tea Party, for many, many years, very, very right wing. And I really believed a lot of that stuff that was going on because they were very, very persuasive on the demonization of Democrats. And all these a lot of it happened on Facebook too. There's no rules or regulations on misinformation on Facebook. So sometimes people really don't know, is this really true? And the bad thing about it is a lot of conservative commentary made regular media out to be like fake news. This is going on before Trump as well. So conservative media or media outside of the conservative world was always questioned. It was always saying it's fake news. There was always, appeasing President Obama. And I didn't realize that when Democrats are fighting for rights of others, I always believe that was an infringement of our rights. And later throughout Trump's presidency, after the election, I had a dialogue that sort of opened my eyes on things. And I think it definitely had to take somebody of huge influence. You guys might know her as Sarah Silverman. We had a respectful dialogue. And I think about it because, when you see a Hollywood people, that was part of this cabal of elitists that was part of the deep state, which some of the stuff that I believed in. And so somebody who's in that area was actually being nice and actually asked, hey, why do you support Trump? It was sort of like, whoa, asking like why I did. Because normally when you fight for a conservative way, American first agenda, it felt like it was social media warfare because your rights are on the line. And that's why there's always anger, there's always fear and fights and arguments and echo chambers and not a really good place for dialogue. So when this dialogue started coming about, it kind of intrigued me a little bit. And so after that, because she's Jewish, I'm Jewish, I kind of asked her like, why doesn't she like Trump? He's pro-Israel, which is a huge Republican talking point, to get, to like Trump. because he was always for Israel. He was always like Jerusalem's the capital of Israel, and that got a lot of Jewish votes. Especially when I know it's kind of crazy because a lot of people compare him to Hitler, and I actually said no, that's wrong. He is for Israel, but so she told me why she didn't like him, and then I just started wondering, okay, I really want to believe why liberals believe the crazy things they do, because like I said before, before Trump, a lot of the smear indoctrination was against liberals, liberal values, democratic officials. So I started asking questions about like, why do liberals care more about illegal aliens in the military? Found out that was not true. Found out that liberals actually do care about the military and care about immigrants as well. And I learned about stinking asylum laws compared to just a conservative talking point of sanctuary cities. Like there's like so many things that a lot of these right-wing propagandists leave out, when it comes to facts, when it comes to rules and things like that. So you don't really see the bigger picture on things. Why Democrats fight for the things they do. So and I learned it was a Democrat that actually created a GI Bill, a program that I'm currently using right now. And Democrats actually do stuff for veterans. So a lot of the beliefs that I've learned over the years, Democrats wanted to take away guns, and things like that. And having eventually proving that wrong, proving a lot of the lies wrong. So then it got to a point where okay, I basically started branching out, leaving Republican Party because I realized that they've been lying for people to stay in power. And then I started questioning Trump, because a lot of what Trump stood for was basically the American first conservative way. So I started seeing a lot of, started learning about him, like, oh, he dodged tracks? Seriously? This, because I used to think he was like Captain America, he was like this patriotic, successful businessman. And to realize that he dodged a track, I don't remember ever seeing it during the campaign or anything like that. Because again, you're only glued to conservative media. Anything outside of conservative media was fake news. So, learning that he taught to draft was like, holy cow, this is not a patriot. Patriots don't talk to drafts. Especially with all the, kneel the flag kind of, talk, fake patriotism as we see coming from the right. So, and I learned, he wasn't a successful businessman. So many, and he has a corrupt past, which I didn't know about. Because basically with Trump, I really didn't know much about him. I saw that he was speaking for conservatives, and that's what really got me hooked on the Trump train. And I also took Fox News' word for things too, so I didn't question. And so I was seeing the corruption. I was seeing that he is not who he says he is. I was seeing the con, and I was realizing that the right wing way of life in America was not the right way. I was able to see, okay, Trump is not who he says he is. And then when I saw the Helsinki meeting with him and Putin behind closed doors, and I saw a replay with different set of eyes of what Hillary Clinton said about being a Russian asset, I couldn't believe it. My mouth dropped, and that that put the nail in the coffin as far as my Trump support. And I haven't looked back since. I continue to move forward, and I speak out like and I more and more I see the red flags. I see how he violates the Constitution, how he manipulates it to for their agenda, which is wrong for America, because America is not a conservative country, or it's actually, I sort of seen it as a progressive country, because it is so diverse, so but it still should have different ideas and everything, but so many values and beliefs that conservatives have is not true, because a lot of it comes from the reaction of what liberals fight for, which is so many rights of other people. And I see that now, which led me to become a Democrat, was there are so many different rights that people who are marginalized, people of color, LGBTQ community, a lot of the groups that Trump has attacked, the conservative right wing has attacked, actually are just asking for acceptance. And I see how wrong that was, and that's what led me to be the liberal Democrat I am today.
Thank you, Mr. Weissman. Sorry to cut you off,
Oh,
but we can continue on during the roundtable. Thank you so much for sharing your valuable personal story with us. We're very grateful to
welcome.
be able to start with such testimonies. Okay, next will be Mr. Jon Atack, who's a former Scientology cult member and author of Opening Minds, Changing Our Minds, and Let's Sell These People a Piece of Blue Sky. Mr. Atack.
Thank you. Donald Trump told Tony Schwartz, his Art of the Deal ghost author, that the world is made up of predators and prey. Authoritarians believe that predators should control the human herd. As President Biden said this week, our choice is between autocracy and democracy. I agree with Churchill that democracy is the worst system, except for all those other forms that have been tried. And I'm sure that we can improve upon democracy, but only by helping people, and especially the next generation, to become cooperators in a consensus society. To create a just and fair world, we have to overcome autocratic or authoritarian beliefs. For democracy to work, the majority of adults must be able to think for themselves and not be swayed by the emotional overstimulation of propaganda and PR. The autocratic system is one of bully and believer, guru and devotee, pseudo-parent and infantilized follower, controller and controlled. Authoritarian leaders are certain that they are unquestionably right. Believing their leaders have superior insight, authoritarian followers submit to their pseudo-parent because they do not trust their own ability to make rational decisions. The Capitol Hill insurrection brought together true believers from the online cult of QAnon, along with sovereign citizens, Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, and assorted white nationalists. All were inspired by the thought-terminating slogan, "Make America Great Again," and believed in a mess of misinformation, disinformation, and mythology. To achieve a true democracy, we must change the submissive attitudes of authoritarian followers so that they can form and articulate their own opinions and challenge the opinions of others without resorting to thought-stopping slogans. Democracy will only be truly possible when the majority can decide for themselves. In the last 40 years, I've worked with about 600 former members of authoritarian belief systems. I've delved deeply into the history and psychology of such beliefs. The former head of Scientology's PR called my book, Let's Sell These People a Piece of Blue Sky, definitive. It's been praised by many scholars. After it was first published in 1990, I turned my attention to the study of authoritarian belief systems. Terrorist groups and gangs are extreme forms of authoritarian cult. The same methods of seduction are found in advertising and selling and are used by pickup artists and confidence tricksters. Authoritarian control relies on the same set of techniques used by human traffickers and child abusers and in multi-level marketing and in pseudo-religious, political and therapy cults. I long ago learned how to help fanatics reframe their beliefs, often in a single conversation, and understood that authoritarianism is the foundation of those beliefs. If you can establish genuine rapport and demonstrate expert knowledge in a safe environment, almost any fanatic will be able to reconsider their authoritarian attachment. It is unfortunate that skills learned over decades by interventionists dealing with authoritarian cults have not been adopted to de-radicalize terrorists. Authoritarianism depends upon false certainties. William James introduced the concept of feelings of knowing in his Varieties of Religious Experience. Fanatics are absolutely convinced, but unable to provide evidence or reasoning to support their convictions. Any challenge to their belief system or their leader will evoke the distress of cognitive dissonance. Even the best evidence will reinforce their devotion. As social scientist Yuval Laor says, the dogma is defended in the same way that a parent defends a baby. To question the dogma is to call their baby ugly. Steve Hassan's model of authoritarian control through behavior, information, thought, and emotion, the BITE model, is an important instrument, as is his influence continuum. I also strongly recommend Alan Shefflin's social influence model, designed for the courts but relevant to all of society. My own aim is to provide preventative material. Just a few basic concepts can tip the balance. There are indeed predators among us, but they're not hard to recognize. Their techniques of seduction and recruitment are also relatively easy to spot. Education is the key to progress, but our educational system has distinct authoritarian tendencies. All too often, obedience is the aim of schooling, rather than Ira Chalef's more effective models of intelligent disobedience and courageous followership. Chalef's ideas are tremendously helpful in developing assertive cooperation and in disabling groupthink and submission. Education should foster debate, consensus, and collaboration rather than force obedience. Only in emergency situations, police and military actions, for instance, is it necessary to relinquish control to a leader. We begin our lives utterly dependent. A life-affirming educational system would create independence and the realization of interdependence by the age of 18. Educated adults can express their views and engage in rational discussion. Along with Charles Dickens, they believe that we should take nothing on its looks and take everything on evidence. Children should be taught to recognize predatory behaviors and to aspire to nurturing pro-social behaviors. By learning the characteristics of human predators and their techniques of seduction, students will be far less likely to be drawn into abusive relationships and authoritarian groups. We can teach how to distinguish facts from fiction, how to avoid echo chambers, and the important difference between expert and rank authority. We can teach critical thinking and the difference between strong belief and strong evidence. Everyone should know about confirmation or my-side bias, about learned helplessness and Stockholm syndrome. The principles of coercive control are not hard to understand. It's only our own cognitive dissonance that inhibits us from learning them. Yuval Noah's work on awe and the inculcation of belief is a vital new tool in understanding why reasoning is so easily bypassed. All students should learn how readily our emotions are manipulated, and Law provides a straightforward roadmap. The ideas I've spoken about here are found in detail in my book, Opening Our Minds, Avoiding Abusive Relationships and Authoritarian Groups. Finally, to overcome authoritarian propaganda, an unvarnished account of history is vital. To accept the failings of our ancestors and give a balanced view of the positive and negative aspects of our own and other cultures. For example, much of the current xenophobic response to Islam stems from a dearth of information. The great benefit to Western society from Islam in the Middle Ages is largely unknown, but European science and medicine were profoundly influenced by Muslim scholars. Indeed, the first universities in Europe, Bologna, the Sorbonne, and Oxford, were created to discuss Ibn Sina's work. The violation of rights in the Middle East after World War I is also pretty much unknown. The process of truth and reconciliation between the world powers begins with an honest reappraisal of the past and the determination to be part of one human family working towards the common good. This is the opposite of authoritarianism and autocracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Atack. Our next speaker is Dr. Stephen Hassan, a leading expert on cults and mind control and the author of The Cult of Trump.
Thank you. And I want to thank David Weissman for your courage to speak out. And Jon is a dear colleague and friend who took on one of the worst cults, Scientology, full bore. I'm honored to be here with you, Dr. Lee. Read both editions of The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. And honestly, there are a few comments I want to make, but I am a former cult member myself. I was recruited at Queens College into a friend group of the Moonies cult, the same people who own the Washington Times to this day. Sean Moon, son of Sun Myung Moon, actually was at the January 6th insurrection, sending out disinformation that it was Antifa. Washington Times, the Mooney paper, did as well. And it was really, unlike David and Jon, I was forcibly deprogrammed after a near-fatal van crash after my fanatic involvement of 2.5 years. I did agree eventually to listen just because I wanted to prove I wasn't brainwashed or mind controlled. And some of the things that helped me get out were former members who are happy and healthy and articulate, but also learning about Chinese communist brainwashing methodologies, in particular the work of Robert J. Lifton's Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism. And I believe he wrote the foreword to The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, Bandy. That was really Dr. Lifton who, when I met him, said, you actually know more than I do because you lived it. They did it to you and you did it to other people. Go study psychology and explain it to people like me. And here I am 45 years later, licensed mental health counselor. I've recently gotten my doctorate, and I did my dissertation on undue influence in the law, wanting to bring together the key concepts of brainwashing, thought reform, coercive persuasion, tying it together with undue influence in elderly, trafficking, which is fraud, force, and coercion. And I did the first quantitative study using my BITE model of authoritarian control to try to demystify this thing of undue influence. And it really needs to be in the law that it's criminal to deceive people and enslave them psychologically, use them for labor trafficking, sex trafficking. We need to change the law and update it to a more up-to-date model of how the mind works and social psychology. And honestly, Dr. Lee, you're a forensic psychiatrist whose expertise is dangerousness. And I've heard you speak. You've come and spoken at our forensic think tank several times, but I had never heard the use of shared psychosis until you used it. And I was like, of course, but is that really a thing? And of course it is a thing. It is a thing. I've been talking about it as brainwashing, mind control, coercive control. But I want to highlight Jon Atack cited law professor emeritus Alan Shefflin's model, social influence model, that offers a framework for judges and juries and everybody to understand there's an influencer or a predator or a predatory organization, an influencee and their unique vulnerabilities. There's purpose, motive, but techniques of using. And one of the critical things with undue influence is authority of the influencer. So that's why it's unethical for therapists to have sex with their clients or abuse them financially, or priests, or presidents. And in my definitive opinion, Donald Trump needs to be charged, arrested, tried, and hopefully convicted of inciting people with the big lie about the election, with all of his cohort people, Rudy Giuliani, Bannon, Stone, all the rest, that have been promulgating national mind control or shared psychosis or coercive persuasion on people, where, as Jon was correctly saying, we need to come back to challenging this notion that we live in a post-truth world. No, truth still matters. Evidence matters. Science matters. The pandemic is real. And as you said, Dr. Lee, one of the primary interventions with shared psychosis is separating the predator who's influencing everybody. But in this case, as we heard aptly from David Weissman, it's Fox News, Breitbart News, it's social media, it's Facebook. It's this whole media echo chamber that is forgetting that to have freedom, we need responsibility. The law says it's illegal to cry fire in a crowded theater if there isn't fire. And that's exactly what Donald Trump has done, the malignant narcissist, to keep hold of power. So I want to say Congress should have open hearings, Senate should have open hearings on the whole topic of undue influence and how intelligent, educated people can be indoctrinated into this black and white, all or nothing, good versus evil reality. And we need to come together as a country. And I'm not seeing the media educating people. I see media inciting people, but not giving really practical, doable things. And like Jon was talking about, developing curriculum for schools to educate people. We need to be thinking like this is a public health crisis. We need preventive education, intervention services. We need help for people who are exiting. And my last comment right now is just that a group of us, including Jon and hopefully David, we're doing a hashtag movement called I Got Out. And we want to destigmatize the fact that intelligent people can be lied to and co-opted, and there's life after believing a narcissist or being in an authoritarian cult. And the more people share their personal stories with those they know, I believe we can turn this situation around. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you again, Dr. Hassan. We're very privileged to have those who not only have the expertise, but who have lived the experience and can offer your expertise as survivors. So it's a very special town hall in that way. Now I will turn it over to Dr. Ben-Ghiat, who will introduce the next two speakers.
Very pleased to introduce two experts in media studies, disinformation, how it travels. So first we'll hear from Becca Lewis, Ph.D. candidate at Stanford, former researcher at the Data and Society Research Institute, and co-author of the important book, Media Manipulation and Disinformation Online. So Becca, over to you.
Hi, thank you so much. It's really amazing to be here with so many incredible experts. I'm Becca Lewis. I research far-right propaganda, both online and in a historical context. And so I really focus on the role of media and media technologies in kind of the formation and spread of harmful beliefs, particularly white supremacist and anti-Semitic beliefs. So I want to start by underscoring a couple of things that I found to be misconceptions about the media and the role that it plays. The first thing, I think it's really easy to think that the internet has fundamentally changed the way that propaganda happens, or that it has kind of created this problem in the past 10 years or so. I think we tend to talk a lot about scary algorithms, kind of deep dark corners of the internet with drawing people in, and there certainly is a lot of that to delve into, but I actually think we can demystify a lot of what's going on online when we look back at the history of mass media in our country, because a lot of the dynamics that have drawn people into far-right movements remain the same today as they were back in the 1920s and from there on. The other thing is that we tend to think of the media as an information vehicle. We think kind of, people say facts, the audience receives the facts, that changes their mind. And that tends to present the idea that if only we can kind of present the right facts to people, audiences will kind of immediately kind of snap out of their ideas. But actually, media help people develop deeply held emotional and identity-based bonds. And so the strongmen that use media kind of take advantage of those really emotional and illiberal aspects of the media. So I want to focus really briefly on two aspects of the media that kind of get at both of those things I was talking about. So the first is that mass media, from the beginning of the 20th century up until now, it has enabled these charismatic authoritarian individuals to reach huge audiences. So we can think back historically in the 1920s and the 1930s, Father Charles Coughlin used the radio to speak to millions of audience members. And what happened, this was new at the time, but it will ring true for today, is that these audience members came to feel that they knew Coughlin intimately. They would send him letters with praise. They would share intimate details about their own lives. And in more recent decades, media psychologists have developed a name for this phenomenon. It's called developing parasocial relationships with celebrities or media figures. And that really refers to the sense that audiences feel they truly know the people that they hear on the radio or see on the screen. And I should mention, it's not a delusion. People are largely aware that they don't actually know these people, but it's that sense that I think all of us get to a degree when we're watching media, that we come to feel that we know people because we hear them, you know, on the radio or see them on TV every week or even every day. So why is that important? Well, in the case of Charles Coughlin, he was openly and increasingly openly anti-Semitic over time. He promoted harmful falsehoods about Jewish Americans in the decade preceding the Holocaust. And as Dr. Ben-Ghiat noted, strongmen use their followers to get them to do their bidding. So especially now, in an age where the media is so fractured and flexible, the line between religious leaders, celebrities, authoritarians, politicians, and cult leaders can become really easily blurred. So in many ways, the approach of Trump or some of the people that follow his lead as media figures, that approach is not so different from the approach of earlier demagogues. Much like them, he's using the media at his disposal to reach audiences directly and to have them develop a personal bond and a shared sense of struggle with him. The other thing that I'll really quickly touch on is that media can be a really effective form of community building. And again, this has been the case for a really long time. So in the 1920s, the Ku Klux Klan would host community screenings of movies that supported their cause, such as Birth of a Nation. They would read, KKK members would read the same KKK newspapers. They would listen to the same KKK radio stations. Many people got involved in that organization because they felt passionate support for the cause, but others got involved because it provided a local and national community fostered through that media. And the bigotry kind of came later. That was the effect after the fact of joining in on this community. And this aspect is also true today. So for people feeling disillusioned or lost or lonely or in need of a community or a cause, movements like MAGA, like QAnon, like the alt-right, they provide that sense of community and meaning. And again, the internet is particularly good for this because it allows for social networking. People can gather in the same internet spaces, become fans of the same far-right celebrities, and in general, become part of a common cause. So I'll leave it at that because I think Jamie is going to take it up and talk about some more specific examples from here. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Becca. That was great. And Mussolini had a syndicated column in U.S. newspapers for 7 years, and was a huge media star, something we forget. So next is Jamie Cohen, professor of media studies at Queens College, part of the City University of New York. And he is specialist in social media, focusing on far-right extremism and digital media literacy. So Jamie, over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Ben-Ghiat. And thank you, everybody. This is a real honor to be here with these experts, and this conversation is incredible. So thank you. My story will be a little bit more specific, considering an anecdote that actually occurred. And Dr. Hassan, I'm at Queens College, and I don't think we have the Moonies anymore, but that's an unfortunate, the Queens College has been around for quite some time. So my story actually is about an event that happened several years back when I had, about 2 or 3 years ago, when I had an actual fascist as a student in my classroom. And I don't make that generalization as a subjective moment. I mean that as in he was identified as a nationalist. And his nationalist was outspoken in my classroom, and the administration actually didn't really have an idea how to handle it. The student was radicalized via YouTube. And so I'll be actually referencing some of the work that Becca Lewis has created in this, because it's important to focus on the aspects of what we don't really consider when we think about radicalization inside of these new media spaces that, as Becca mentioned, are really part of a longer structure of how media creates this type of structure in the first place, especially in parasocial relationships. This student was radicalized by some YouTubers who are known as some far-right YouTubers like Stefan Molyneux and Lauren Southern. But even more interestingly, he was part of a very strange sub-fandom and a subculture where he was further radicalized on a Tumblr site called My Nationalist Pony. And if all of these names and these sites make no sense to you, you're not alone, but I assure you they're actually extremely popular to some young people. And when in a college setting, when around a lot of peers and developing an identity, the parasocial relationships that occur are very similar to what we're experiencing right now, is where I'm making eye contact with a screen, and people who are connecting across these spaces, these digital spaces, actually are influenced by this very specific communications ability. As Becca wrote in the Data and Society report, Alternative Influence Network, it's part of a larger phenomenon where YouTubers reach young audiences by broadcasting far-right ideas in the form of news and entertainment. So what they did is they kind of reframed the way that they were delivering some of the information to avoid some of those bans. These reactionaries are very good at finding their ways around these techniques. Stefan Molyneux was later banned and My Nationalist Pony is long gone. But to build off of what Becca said about algorithms, I think we blame tech very often, but it really does come down to a social issue, an actual issue in which people to people, or the connections between influencers, support each other and kind of get that delivery method across. The student was radicalized in a method of ways that YouTubers use what Amanda Montell would call cultish language, where just like other cults, they make their followers feel special or understood. They create a dependence on themselves. This is using coercion. And they use, as previously mentioned in the other talks, thought terminating phrases, memes, reductionism, and us versus them dichotomy. And obviously this sounds pretty familiar because the strongman attitude of this is kind of a mimicry or a reduced version of the leader. It's the ability for them to kind of take the mantle of a Trumpist behavior and amplify that message to young people. And it's definitely worrisome in a classroom setting because fascist tendencies are based on a very strong anti-intellectual stance. And in the way of that is that fascists in some ways want to reject intellectualism and replace that with the media and universities of their making. This young man was actually a frequent visitor to Turning Points USA, a website and a Trump-friendly site that kind of converts young college-age students to the far right and recruits through these sites. And at the very top of this site to this day is a professor watch list. And it was very often that something I would walk in the classroom and see on his computer. But what I think is interesting is that there's ways to combat this, or ways to kind of come back and reverse this course, or not take this as a simple way of saying, oh, we can't have access to these young people. What we can do inside of our spaces, as previously mentioned, is consider how we could reframe or enact critical thinking inside of our classrooms. One of the ways in which that I was able to gain access to some of the young people and bend it back is empowerment, giving digital competencies, showing that techniques and being a YouTuber isn't just something that's on the side of the screen that they can't have access to. They have the ability to edit, to make media, to create video. And those competencies give them the feeling that they can actually be part of the system. But more importantly, I think, is one of the things that is a critical understanding of how social media operate. Like Becca said with her framing of social media in a long scale, or new media within a long scale, it's part of a media historical period. We're all in this, it's in the same structure. So we have to think critically about it beyond the idea of just the consuming nature, where we're just consuming what's in our feeds. We have to kind of examine the profit models and see how those act, and where data is being taken from us or captured from our existence, or how we're operating as part of a system we have no real say in operating. But I think what's really important to the way that I've been working with this is making sure that we use terms that empower students to not push back, that we show them that this is part of an acceptance, that I can make sure that I'm not the them, that I remove the us versus them mentality and say we're in this together because we are on our side of the screen. And if we are able to understand that, I think I found some ways that we could access the ability to critically analyze these structures in probably something that would be valuable in a very long-term way. Deplatforming works. We've seen Stefan Molyneux and that Tumblr been removed from the internet. Lauren Southern is still out there. They still use their techniques and they bend it, but that ability to remove it doesn't make them go away. It just means that there's other places for them to be. So we have to keep a vigilant eye on how young people are accessing new media structures like this. Otherwise, we can't assume that it just goes away and disappears. It just moves to other places. And by taking a critical view and being empowered to see the structure as it operates, gives us that ability to be a little bit like more in control of how to manage our future as we go into a more likely new media format. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate being able to talk with you all today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Lewis and Dr. Cohen, for bringing such an important perspective to this. Going back to shared psychosis, I often talk about how at national scale this has become a mental health pandemic. And just like any pandemic, you have the source of the spread of symptoms, and then you have the environment, which the media environment consists of in facilitating the spread. And then you have host vulnerability, which is the population that has not been taught critical thinking and has not been taught how to guard themselves against this. And so thank you so very much for bringing us this perspective. Now we have about 20 minutes for a roundtable discussion. And it's pretty much freestyle the way that we have been doing it lately, unless Dr. Ben-Ghiat, you have some questions.
I don't have a specific questions I'm curious about, because so the theme of education has been repeatedly talked about, and we can't miss that we're in a period in the States, and every time you have rising authoritarianism, the universities and schools and critical thinking are targeted. And it's happening in the US very at the state level, right? With all of the laws against teaching anything with critical in it. Now it's critical race theory. But this is a kind of a shorthand, a distillation of a kind of assault on critical thinking, on the shared vision of the past that has been mentioned. A kind of a past that authoritarians need to suppress, right? So just this, I wonder what people have to say, how to, what we can do to, in the face of this kind of attacks on education. I agree fully with everything that's been said about what to do in our classrooms or in our communities, but how to best resist this this state, coming down from the top, these attempts to restrict free speech, which is what they are for authoritarian purposes.
I wanted to offer a different frame to the education piece, and I want to say that in social psychology, the fundamental attribution error, people have an unconscious bias to look at the person's disposition as opposed to their environment or their social context. So the average person thinks, oh, I could never fall for a cult. I could never be an authoritarian. So we have to diminish that false belief through education. And I also, in my research for the cult of Trump, I wrote about Coughlin, by the way, Becca, as well, and the efforts to stop him and deplatform him, which actually happened and needed to happen. But there's psychological warfare in a very sophisticated level, using AI, using collected personal data of everybody, and it's operating in very sophisticated ways. And it's not just teaching people critical thinking or media literacy, but I really think people need to understand more about social psychology as well as civics, and that we need to depend on each other for our survival, planetary survival. So I just wanted to mention, oh, and lastly, that in my thesis of the cult of Trump, there are actual authoritarian cults influencing Donald Trump, and I named them, as well as his base were in cults already, many of them, New Apostolic Reformation, Opus Dei, neo-Nazi groups, just to name a few. So we have a bigger problem than just Donald Trump. We have a real issue of separating out ethical, legitimate organizations that should have our tax exempt status that we support, and ones that are using that to manipulate politics for their own power, money, and sex. Thanks.
To build off of Dr. Hassan's point about civics, I think that's one of the most important factors that I've been able to enable is having young people get very local, seeing where that occurs. Because if we take away the globalization idea of all of the kind of like the miasma of social media and message boards that kind of turn everything into an ideal or an ideology, and we make it something physical that somebody can act with and actually engage with, they feel much more empowered to take small action, and small action becomes bigger action later. And I think that's a really good point. So thank you.
Yeah, I'll just quickly jump onto that and say that to Jamie's point, I think one thing I have written about is the connection between the collapse of local news and the quickness with which people kind of seek out other ways to get involved. And so that gets to some of the things that people are talking about in the chat, which I think are incredible and incredibly relevant about the economics of news and media and how much that's an issue. When there isn't kind of a thriving local news environment, then people start to look for meaning and purpose elsewhere. And I can't agree enough with what Jamie said about trying to get them back rooted in the local. The other thing I'll just add to that is, in terms of education, I think there's another kind of major mental health issue at work here, and that's the mental health of the teachers themselves, who often are trying to grapple with teaching, first of all, without enough institutional support as it is. And then on top of that, when teachers become the targets of these harassment campaigns, it can be incredibly scary, incredibly traumatizing. And I think focusing some efforts as well on how to support and bring materials to teachers to let them know, how they can be supported in any number of time, or trying to work with the institutions to build more institutional support in anything along those lines, I think is incredibly helpful.
If you are at a public, if you're obviously public school teacher, or if you're at a publicly funded university, in some states, they're trying to come for you. Starting at UVA with somebody who has academic power. He's a full professor, Larry Sabato, who directs the Democracy Institute. He has an endowed chair, so he's got power. And they're trying to, it reminds me of stuff that Orban and Putin do. They are trumping up a quote ethic. This is the Virginia GOP. They're trumping up a quote ethics investigation against him. I don't know the latest status of this, but this is what they're threatening to do publicly. So at every level if you're at a private university, people still write and try and get you fired all the time. They complain to your boss and stuff, but they have a little less leeway. But I think what Becca said, providing support. The other thing I'd mention about, it's all part of the local, the schools being rooted in communities and local news. It's about, who do you trust? Because local news, where people were very attached to their local anchors or radio stations, and I do, call-in radio and like small cities or towns, and it's very important because authoritarianism is always about destroying the horizontal bonds that are civic ties, civic society, and instituting, and this is cults, right? The vertical bonds between at the national level, the leader and the people. And when we have rallies, what do the rallies do? The staging, the choreography of the rally, it's all about the leader and the people and the vertical bond. But when you have authoritarian political cultures, and you see this even where we still have functioning democracy, the system populates little Trumps and little Mussolinis. And so the culture locally and statewide, all the levels shifts to become authoritarian. So we had Pompeo, we had William Barr. Pompeo's he's a little Mussolini, little Trump. And so they in turn replicate the horizontal bond of the leader and destroy. So think about what happened at in America with all the federal agencies, where you had massive purges of people at the Department of Justice, at state, and they were staffed instead with lackeys and ideologues and zealots loyal to Trump and Trumpists. So this is something that we in America have lived through in a very concentrated fashion, this shift of cultures at the local level with the destruction of local news, at the political level, the end of dissent. You cannot be a dissenter inside the Republican Party anymore. So all these vertical chains of authority have been reinforced. And this helps these cults to thrive, I think. So Bandy, do you have any questions for the panel before we open it up to general questions?
Well, I just wanted to ask Mr. Weissman and Mr. Atack if you had any responses to what other experts have said, or anything you'd like to add here.
Very happy to hear Charlie, excuse me, Charlie Coughlin mention, because he's quite significant to my understanding of the upbringing of Ron Hubbard, who of course grew up in America during Coughlin's time, and pretty much his method of rhetoric came from Coughlin. It seems to me that we maybe come to the time where we ought to be testing people who are going into political office in some way to see if they are safe and genuine people. And while, you know, it's true to say that the more intelligent predators among them, malignant narcissists, psychopaths, whatever, would be able to get through such tests, it's also, I believe, right to say that such people are no more intelligent than the rest of us. So it would catch, you might be able to filter out a certain amount of people by using, you know, Hare's revised checklist and other instruments to see if they're fit for public office, which of course, you know, the dangerous case of Donald Trump showed very thoroughly that Donald Trump was not fit for office. And, you know, there were devastating consequences because he was allowed into that position. We're now seeing all over the US. I mean, Joe Biden talked about what, 400 pending bills in states at the moment to interfere with voter registration and the rights of voters. We're seeing an autocracy trying to come into being. And if we could perhaps filter out some of the autocrats and perhaps, you know, publish, you know, in this country, restaurants are checked every few weeks and given a health rating, and maybe people should have some kind of health rating before they're allowed into political office.
That's an excellent point. Thank you for saying that, Mr. Atack. Well, just about every position in the United States that deals with life and death matters, even just one life, is required to take a mental capacity evaluation before taking the job. And yet, and especially all military officers, police officers, and those who handle nuclear weapons are mandated to undergo extensive psychological testing and renew it every year. And yet the person who orders nuclear weapons is not required to do so. And fitness exams are actually global. They test whether or not the person is able to respond rationally and based on reality, no matter what disorder they have. So it would weed out all kinds, including narcissistic personality disorder or psychopathy, and supposedly. So we need people who are vigilant about those things, and it can be done. If it is done, then you're pretty much excluding all the potentially contagious viruses from taking positions of influence, and shared psychosis would be prevented.
Okay.
And shared psychosis is a real phenomenon that's been described since the middle of the 19th century. And Carl Jung described epidemics, national level academic epidemics, as well as Erich Fromm. And so it's a well-known phenomenon.
As you say, the folia plusia has been in literature for a long time, and we can
Yes.
go back to, you know, the Devils of Loudun or to the Salem witch trials and see mass sociogenic illness coming forward. My other point is that there's a lot of focus on critical thinking, and there should be a lot of focus on critical thinking. But in 40 years of dealing with people who are coming away from authoritarian groups, critical emoting is very much the important thing. What is it that attached a person emotionally to the belief system? And I'm again going to mention the work of Yuval Laor, which I think is leading edge in this